118 hours. You like climbing mountains, don't you? Well, too bad, because today we're playing Celeste, a game that has absolutely nothing to do with climbing. Wait, huh? Oh, it's Reddit. Of course their interpretation is wrong. Like, seriously, the Steam page for this game never even mentions climbing, and that's for a good reason. You don't need to climb to reach the summit. But, of course, there is much more to this game than just reaching the credits. There is still a ton of post-game content to explore. So today I am proud to announce we are continuing our quest to complete Celeste as God intended by beating the core and B-sides without climbing. This video is going to be chock full of insane tricks, so I recommend checking out the first part of this series just so you don't get overwhelmed. Let's not get ahead of ourselves though, because we'll first have to define what even counts as climbing, and this is actually harder than you might think. Last time I used the no grabbing variant in the options menu, but in doing so I actually brushed over the most common way to do Celeste grabless, just not pressing the grab button and having it unmapped. Now, you might be thinking, well, potato potato, no climbing is no climbing. But actually, there are some major differences between these two rule sets. I'll mention these later on when they become relevant. In general though, standard grabless is more restrictive than the grabless variant. For this video though, I will still be playing with the variant, but I'll do my best to mention cases where standard grabless differs a bit. For right now, let's just start with the run, for crying out loud. Okay, I'm sorry, I lied. Let's first talk mechanics for a bit. There are a couple of things that are unique to this chapter that affect the challenge. First and foremost, Madeline doesn't regain her dashes when on the ground, so we'll have to get creative with conserving them. This stage also has a fire and ice theme to it. Now, the ice sections are usually pretty chill, but the fire sections have two mechanics that involve grabbing. There are the launching blocks, which are activated by either stepping on top of them or grabbing onto the side of them. For obvious reasons, we'll only be able to stand on top of them. Secondly, we have conveyor walls, which move you upward, but only when you grab onto them. So those are completely out of the question. For that reason, I tend to call them grabavators because they're just a no-go. We'll mostly try to skip these obstacles by neutraling. As a quick refresher, neutraling is a way to scale walls without climbing by exploiting how the game handles wall jumps. If you need a more detailed explanation of neutraling, or really any trick I mention in this video, check the bottom left corner of the screen. Using just neutrals and a bit of common sense, we can beat the entire first checkpoint without much hassle, and even get one berry in this ice room. The first room of the second checkpoint poses a major difficulty spike though. At the end of this room, there's a launching block with spikes on the top, which means we won't be able to use it. That wouldn't be too much of a problem if it weren't for the fact that this gap is way too damn big. We'd need a dash to make it across, but the first part of the room already requires 2 dashes. To make things worse, there's a conveyor wall here that you seemingly have to use to get over this thick wall. Now, there is a solution to this room. By doing a diagonal dash into the corner of the block here, you can get to the switch in 1 dash instead of 2. To skip the grabavator, notice how there's a small bit of wall right here that we can jump off, and if you time it absolutely perfectly, you can just narrowly skim past these spikes. After that, we're golden. At least we would be if I didn't suck at this game. Also, don't forget to grab the berry up here, otherwise you'll have to redo this room. After this, there are a couple of ice rooms and 2 berries that aren't worth mentioning, and then there's this room! You might be quick to dismiss this room as completely and utterly impossible. I mean, seriously, we already had so much trouble getting past 1 conveyor wall just a minute ago, how are we going to skip 5 of them? But actually, there's a key difference here. These walls are only 1 block wide. And as it turns out, you can neutral over those. I actually did this a couple of times in the first episode, but I never really paid much attention to it. And since these are going to be a recurring theme throughout this video, I might as well give them a nickname. How about a oneer? Side note, Deku, whom you might know from the Discord server, suggested that I name it an oboe, short for one block obstacle, but I don't know, man. I have nothing against oboes, but... What? Anyway, one-ers are incredibly precise tricks, so we'll usually want to avoid them. Luckily, in this room, 3 of the 5 grab evaders can be skipped with dashes, and only 2 require one-ers. This is still difficult, but it's doable, so let's just move on. We've now reached the next checkpoint, featuring Rising Fire and Ice. There is a lot more focus on speed and vertical movement in this part. If we do the second room as intended, we'll quickly run into trouble here. There's just too little time to get on top of this platform before the rising lava gets us. This part becomes a lot easier if you do the first part of this room faster, for example by doing a wall bounce off this block to immediately get to the dash crystal. Then we have a lot more time to get to the platform. A wall bounce is as simple as it looks. You dash into a wall and then jump off the wall to get a boost in height. The rest of this room is just a bunch of neutrals, so nothing special. This is actually the case for most of the other rooms in this checkpoint until the second to last room. This room has a ton of launching blocks with spikes and really no other platforms. The gaps between the first few blocks are small enough that we can just dash from one to the other, but then this gap is immense. Now, this is where our luck runs out, unfortunately. As far as I know, there is no way to do this fire part without grabbing. Note that I said fire part and not the whole room, because it turns out that in this chapter, and only this chapter, there is an exploit you can use to kind of mess things up. You see, in the previous room, there's a switch that transitions from ice to fire. But what if we just don't hit it? Well, that means we can do this room as an ice section now. This trick doesn't work for any other room in this checkpoint, because there are walls that block your progress if you don't hit the switch. On its own, this little exploit doesn't do much, but another oversight by the developers actually turns this into a viable solution. When you're doing this room as a fire section, there is a massive firewall here, literally. And as it turns out, the developers forgot to put that wall in for the ice section. So we can just beat this room by neutraling on the right wall. Easy! The final room doesn't require any fancy exploits, just a couple of dashes to skip some obstacles. Now we're on to the checkpoint that is often referred to as the sandwich part of the core. Why? Because now we're stuck between 2 layers of fire and ice. It's a sandwich. The second room of this part starts off with a big horizontal gap. The intended way to clear this is with 2 dashes, but then we don't have any dashes to get over this thick wall. It's not a oneer, so we can't do it. Now might be a good time to reintroduce some old friends of ours, the Wave Dash, Hyper Dash, and Super Dash. As you might know from part 1, there are many ways to perform these, but for right now, let's just start with the basic maneuvers. Level 1, if you will. A super dash is performed by dashing left or right and then jumping afterward. If you dash diagonally down instead, it's called a hyper dash, and if you dash into the ground while in the air, it's a wave dash. In this room, a level 1 hyper dash will do the trick. I also made use of a screen transition to regain my dashes, but you don't actually need to do that to beat this room. So don't worry about it for now. There are only a couple more rooms after this, and they're not that different from how you would do them normally. I will give an honorable mention to the 4th room though, for being an absolute pain in the dash. That marks the end of the core. It was a bit of a doozy to start off with, but it's done now, and I promise the next few chapters won't be that hard. Speaking of... Yes, I know, we've skipped Forsaken City. It's for pacing reasons, and I'll come back to it after this chapter. So, if you remember from part 1, Oldside's A-side was arguably the easiest A-side in the run, and the same holds true for the B-side, although there are 2 rooms worth looking at. The 5th room of the first checkpoint features a mix of dream blocks and regular platforming, and it's the regular platforming that will prove to be an issue. After this dream block, you're first expected to grab jump over this wall jump off the other side, and then dash up here. After that, you get this dash crystal, grab jump over the wall again, and then dash into the next dream block. So, altogether, there are 2 cases where we have to grab jump over a wall. We'll tackle these separately. The first grab jump can be easily skipped by going under the wall and wall bouncing off it. The second grab jump is more interesting though, because it shows an odd difference between standard grabless and the variant. You see, even with the grabless variant on, grabbing is occasionally possible. In my previous video, I briefly mentioned that holding grab at the end of a red bubble tricks the game into making you grab anyway. But there are other ways to circumvent the variant. One of them can be found here. If you dash upright from the Stas crystal into the wall, you have a small window of time where it's possible to perform a grab jump. So this is one of the main reasons why runners don't use the grabless variant. It's just too lenient sometimes. If you want to beat this room in standard grabless, there is also a way to do it. Just wall jump from this left wall and go over the platform. Looks easy, right? Well, it may not look like it, but this trick is precise to 1/5 of a pixel. Yes, we are getting into subpixel territory now, and we are swiftly leaving it behind, because I do not feel like explaining that right now. The other tricky room is coincidentally also the 5th room, but this time it's the 5th room of the second checkpoint. Wait, I think I might have made a mistake here. This room is actually really easy, so you just get the first 2 key tokens, then dash through some blocks, get the 3rd one, and then just let this platform take you to the end. Oh, wait a second, that's why this room is in my notes. We can't catch our ride. I mean, we do have a dash, but that doesn't reach because the platform is already too far away. So close, not so far. Wait a second. Who's saying that we actually have to get these key tokens anyway? We can just skip past them, which means a dash will actually get us to the block. Oh wait, we still have to get to the end of this room. That's not too much of a problem now though. By dashing through the small gap and then wall jumping off the left side of the block, all that stands between us and the end is just a wall jump off this wall. But wait a second. Why did that wall jump even work? There were spikes on that wall. Well, as it turns out, this game has an interesting way of dealing with spikes. As long as you're moving in the direction they're pointing, they'll never kill you. And I mean never. Yeah, just not even gonna... Wait, what? Wait, what? Wait a second. Because we're always moving left during this wall jump, we don't die. It's really as simple as that. One thing that will make this wall jump easier is if you have 2 jump buttons. I would explain it, but images say more than 1,000 words, so here's a graphic showing why it's easier. Everything else in this chapter is trivial, so let's go back to that one chapter I skipped. There is a good reason why I skipped this chapter initially. It is incredibly difficult. And I don't mean that lightly, we are talking like ridge levels of difficulty here. I should probably preface this by saying this will be a long segment with a lot of new tricks, but I'll try my best to not make it overwhelming. We will have to do it now and not later though, because the knowledge we'll get here is instrumental for the endgame chapters, and those aren't forgiving either. Case in point, literally the first room. This room is usually forgettable, just a grab jump here and a dash there, but this gap at the start makes it impossible to get through without a dash. But then we don't have a dash to clear this part. Well, it turns out you can actually barely make it to the opposite wall with a wall jump, and then neutral up the wall to get to the end. When we get to the second room, we're introduced to the true star of this chapter, track blocks with spikes on the top. Just like the crumbling blocks in Core, these blocks can only be activated by standing on top of them or grabbing the side. If you can't use the top of the blocks, we'll have to find a way to skip them. Well, for some strange reason, the grabless variant does allow us to activate these platforms from the side. Not standard grabless though. The second room is pretty straightforward, at least with the grabless variant. You can simply activate the first block and wall jump off it, and by using a wall bounce here, you can get past the second block as well. The third room will require a bit of new tech though. Remember how I said there are different levels to wave dashes, hypers and supers? Well, it's about time we upgrade our dash trio to level 2, extended dashes. Extended really just means that we get our dash back after doing the trick. With supers and hyper dashes, this is done by delaying your jump by a couple of frames. As for wave dashes, it's already baked into the trick. You see, a good wave dash... That was not a good wave dash. A good wave dash is already extended by default. Awesome! The reason I'm only bringing this up now is because it wasn't really necessary to do this kind of thing in the core. We didn't get our dash back in that chapter anyway, so doing an extended dash was fairly useless. From now on though, practically every hyper or super will be extended. Okay, fourth room time. This one features a lot of track blocks moving at a wonky angle. It might be possible to neutral off these to get enough height and distance, but if you try that, you'll notice that this game is clearly not designed with this type of gameplay in mind. It is incredibly janky. Janky, 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 janky. So let's not do that, and instead we'll do the strategy used in standard Grabless. I'll go over the steps first and I'll explain afterward why it all works. First, do a hyperdash on the starting platform. For once, this will just be a regular one and not an extended one like the last room. Then brush on this corner here so we hit the ground for a brief period of time. After this, you want to let Madeline fall for a bit, then press jump when you're about here, and then you should make it to the next track block. The tricky wall bounce and some neutrals will do the rest. That trick probably warrants an explanation. I'll start by addressing the elephant in the room first, the fact that we jumped off literal air here. This phenomenon is called coyote time. It's a period of time after falling off a platform where the game is generous and will still let you jump. This is hard-coded into the game, so it's more forgiving to the player, but we can abuse this trick here to get a bit more distance to our jump. That also explains why you have to hit the ground here. Another thing you might be wondering, shouldn't Madeline have died from these spikes? Well, no actually, for the same reason that the spikes in this room didn't kill us. We weren't moving in the direction they were pointing. I told you spikes were weird in this game. I think that about explains everything there is to this trick, so let's move on to room 5. Remember how I said in the previous room that neutraling off track blocks is janky? Well, this is a great example because we have to do it here. I can't really explain what's going on here when I'm neutraling and jumping off the track block, it's just something that takes practice. Anyway, that was room 5, and the game is finally giving us a break for once, because the 6th room doesn't even involve grabbing. Oh wow, that's a real funny game. Okay, yeah, of course you can just, I don't know, get across this entire chasm while using a track block that has spikes on 3 different sides. Yeah, I mean, you can just use the 4th side, right? It doesn't matter that the platform moves in literally the opposite direction. It's fine. Just like a wall bounce over the block? Or no, wait, I've got it. You super dash over to the right wall and then, that's a lot of spikes there. Don't you think that's a bit unforgiving, game? Oh yeah, no, I know what you want me to do. Activate the platform in this little corner here and then neutral off it while holding right so I don't get killed by the spikes. Hey, we did it! Oh, I see what you're trying to do here, huh? Well, that's just lovely, isn't it? Well, I am not having it. I was having a great day just playing Celeste, making a video about it, but no, you trash block. You had to come in and ruin my freaking day. If you couldn't tell by my tone there, I'm not too much of a fan of this room. It is incredibly forgettable when playing this game casually, just jumping off 2 trash blocks and not hitting any spikes, but it is absolute pain and torture when doing Grabless. The first platform can actually be cleared with the spike hitbox trick I've mentioned plenty of times now, but the second trash block is so impossible that it makes the first part look like this game's prologue. And I don't use the word impossible as a dysphemism here, it is literally impossible with our current knowledge of the game. Just a second, let's see if this works. Okay, there we go. So, it's a shame that this room is impossible, but we'll just have to accept it and move on with the run. From now on, I'll show a grab counter on screen to count any other grabs of shame, but hopefully we won't need it. You might already notice that the standard grab counter differs from the variant grab counter, and that's because in standard Grabless, the first part of this room is also impossible. We'll just have to accept that as well. At least the game is nice to us again by giving us 2 more rooms that aren't affected by this challenge. Room 10 has some interesting tech though. Doing this room with the grabless variant is tough, but nothing special. We can mostly take the intended route, albeit with some trash block shenanigans added in. However, standard grabless is where this room really shines, because for standard grabless, we can't activate these 2 trash blocks without grabbing. So, 2 grabs, right? Well, no. We do have to grab onto the first trash block, but we can actually make use of it to fling ourselves to this wall, where we can do some neutrals and then... I mean, it doesn't get any better than that, does it? We're now in the final checkpoint of this demanding B-side, and please, just get me out of here. There are only 5 rooms left. I guess 6 if you count the cassette room, but that one is jokingly simple. So anyway, this room. As with the previous one, I'll explain the grabless variant strat first. To get out of this cramped space while retaining our dash, let's upgrade our trustworthy dash trio to the maximum level by adding in reverse dashes. They are another variation on our dash trio where we dash in one direction but jump in the other direction. I will admit these are a bit niche, but not as much as you'd expect. I actually used one of these in the first part of this series to skip an entire checkpoint in chapter 5 and to beat the funny room in Summit. You know the funny room. I'm getting a bit off topic, so let's return to the room. A reverse dash gets us enough distance to activate this trash block. Now, you might think we just go over it with the help of janky physics, but going under it and using our dash is actually way easier. Then we can land on this crumbling platform, get our dash back, and do the rest of this room pretty much as intended. So what about standard grabless? You might immediately brush this one off as impossible, because we have a trash block here that's blocking our way. But luckily, this is the perfect room to explain a trick exclusive to standard grabless, known as grabless platform activation. So how is it done? Well, it might not look like it, but for one frame, Madeline actually stepped on top of the block, which is also a valid way of activating it. The specifics of these grabless platform activations can differ based on the situation, but that's the gist of it. Also, standard grabless uses grabless platform activations to do rooms 2 and 3 if you're wondering. And as for the first block in this room, it can simply be dashed under. Well, I say simply, but it's still really precise. We have to jump off this sliver of wall to make it past. But hey, it works, and that means we don't have to add anything to the counter here. Where we will have to increase the counter is in this room. This is one of those textbook examples where the only way to progress is to climb. It's a shame, but there's not much we can do about it. If you were to beat this room normally from this point on, it would require 3 grabs, both in variant and standard grabless, so let's not do that. As it turns out, wall kicks will work to skip the second block, but to get past the third block, I'll need at least a couple of paragraphs. Going above the block is possible, but it's actually more complicated than going under, so for the sake of time I won't mention it here. That doesn't mean going under is much easier though. We'll need to tackle this one in steps. Step 1! This is the 3rd time I've said this now, but these spikes will only kill you when you're moving towards them. So if you can find a way to keep moving upward without ever falling, we can make it past this block by going under it. Step 2! Remember how I said you can occasionally grab, even with the no grabbing variant enabled? Well, this is one of those special moments. If you dash full throttle into this wall, you can grab jump off it for a brief period of time. Cool, but what does that actually do for us? Grabbing a wall makes you lose all of your momentum, right? Well, not always. If you time a grab jump perfectly, it can actually give you more speed than is otherwise possible. This phenomenon is called a corner boost, because you're grabbing onto the corner to make yourself speed up. Yes, I know it's strange that we're grabbing in a no grabbing challenge, but it's completely fair game according to our rule set. Step 3! You forgot there was a step 3, didn't you? Well, it's not that complicated. You only need to press jump the frame after you do the grab jump to jump off this trash block and get to the far wall. Simple, right? Yeah, no, it isn't, but it'll do the job. Okay, phew. All of that was just to skip one trash block. And if you thought that was fun, you'll enjoy wall jumping here for eternity until you get to the small gap. Needless to say, I am not competent enough at video gaming to do this room legitimately. Okay, yeah, sharpen your pitchforks, it's fine. Because I've got a solution to this. I call it the list of evidence that shows I am too incompetent to play this game, or Luatsiatitputige for short. I should probably just call it the list, actually. But anyway, anytime I can't complete a room, instead of crying about it, I'll put it on the list. And speaking of, there were 2 rooms in part 1 that I couldn't do legitimately, so they're going on the list now. Okay, there you go. At the end of the video, I will genuinely put this list up on my wall so it can haunt me for the rest of my days. I hope it sticks actually, because I have no idea if this will work. This probably looks terrible on camera, but... yeah, okay, it's not gonna stick. Oh right, standard grapplers. You still exist. I think you can see why going under the block is not possible in standard grapplers, but fortunately, going above is still an option. I'm not going to delve deep into how this works exactly, but just know there's a grabless platform activation here, a funny spike jump here, and a dash above the block here. Okay, finally we're out of that room. Luckily, we can quickly gloss over these next 2 rooms as they can be beaten as intended. However, I will give a shout out to standard grabless here for this epic super dash off the trash block. Look at it go! And here we are, the final room of this chapter. But don't think the game will let us off the hook this easily. We've got a lot of trash blocks and a ton of height to gain. The first half of the room is difficult, but it's nothing to write home about. Once we get to this part though, things take a turn for the worse. There are 3 trash blocks that span a massive gorge. This looks a lot like the one impossible room we saw earlier, although maybe the one difference is that we can actually grab onto the sides of the block this time. I'll start with standard grabless this time because it actually has it easier for once. The first trash block can be skipped by doing an extended super dash off this crumbling platform, but there's nothing else in the stage that helps us skip the other 2, so we'll just have to use those as intended. Also, at the end, we'd normally use a dash, but this is easily solved by jumping off this bit of wall and getting to the end that way. 2 grabs. Nope, just kidding, because while I was editing this video, a grab save was discovered on this room. We've always known that you can do a grabless platform activation on this first trash block, but only recently it was discovered that it's actually useful. If you activate this block on the last possible frame, you can barely get ahead of it while it's moving. That allows us to regain our dash here, jump back up to the block and wall jump off it. Then we have enough speed and height to activate the second block with the grabless platform activation. Unfortunately, we now have no known way to regain our dash again, so the third block still requires grabbing. At least that saves 1 grab. As for the grabless variant, it is a janky mess. At least I don't have to explain any new tricks, it's just me getting max height off 3 trash blocks in a row. I think my reaction at the end sums it up best. And with that, we're finally free from this mess. It only took us... wait, 4.5 minutes? That's a short story by Kate Okay, seriously though, what happened here? Well, here's the thing. I actually recorded the entirety of this chapter, minus rooms 7 and 12, in 1 hour and 19 minutes, at least 40 of which were spent on the last room. And then I went to my capture card to stop the recording, and the red light just stayed on. At which point I promptly said, "Oh no," because I realized what had happened. My capture card had borked. I checked how much footage I had, and it was everything up to room 10. I was devastated when I realized this, but I decided I needed to re-record the missing rooms now, so I wouldn't have to suffer later. And then I did it in 4.5 minutes! Ah, resort. I never expected to say this, but this chapter is a bit of respite after the arduous journey that was Forsaken City. I mean, look at how easy these first 2 screens are. Oh, never mind. Maybe this chapter will also be problematic. So, the reason why this screen worries me is the series of 2 block wide walls. Tours, if you will. As I said earlier, it's not a wonder, so we can't do it. Which means we will have to find a way to bypass all of these walls. One good thing about this room is that it's open, so we can really make use of our dash techniques here. This platform at the top of the room looks promising, so what techniques should we use? Well, we need to get a lot of distance, which means we'll either want to do a wave dash or an extended hyper dash. And because this platform is quite small, we'll opt for a wave dash. However, if we try that, I think you can see why that doesn't work. Okay, so wave dashes are out of the question. We'll have to somehow do an extended hyper here. As a reminder, to get your dash back from a hyper, we need to be on the ground for a couple of frames after the dash. After some tinkering, I discovered that if you go to the far left side of this platform and delay your hyper dash for as long as possible, you're on the ground long enough that the game gives you your dash back. Cool. And with that, we can get to the next platform. Unfortunately, this one also requires an extended hyper dash for the same reasons as the other platform. You might think this room is a bad omen for things to come, but actually we just got really unlucky here. By comparison, the next few rooms are way friendlier to us. Even if the cycles can sometimes seem troublesome, I always manage to find semi-consistent ways of dealing with them. Well, almost always at least. This mess of a room will require some scrutiny. It looks like you need to do a oneer here to get over this wall, but you don't need to. The ceiling sticks out here, which allows us to wall jump off that instead. The real problem is this wall. Again, it looks like you can just do a oneer here, but these dust bunnies actually make the wall thicker. So if we try to do a oneer as usual, we'll get hit by the dust bunnies. But let's rewind to just before Madeline gets hit. You really get the impression that Madeline could do a horizontal dash to make it across this gap. Alas, when we try, it doesn't give us enough distance. Nevertheless, we might be able to make use of this top wall somehow. If we could dash under that wall and wall jump off it, then we'd be golden. But how do you dash under something and then gain enough height to wall jump off it? That doesn't make any sense, right? Well, wrong, because Celeste is a video game and video games have bugs. Duh. Reintroducing demo dashing. By dashing downwards and then changing your dash direction within 5 frames, the game freaks out and gives Madeline a smaller hitbox for some reason. With that, we can dash under this wall. When the dash ends, we regain our normal hitbox, which means we can wall jump off this wall. Huzzah! This trick is way more useful than you might think. In fact, it's so useful that I've already used it 2 other times throughout this video without telling you. In this room in the core, demo dashing makes it easier to get under this block, and in Old Sight, we can use it to get through this tight gap. The more you know. You've heard me say this a dozen times now, but the next few rooms are nothing to sweat about. There is a scary part here with these dust bunnies, but a well-timed wall bounce solves that issue. After a nice break, it's time for Dust Bunnies 2: Return of the Thick Walls. Not the most original name, but it gets the point across. If we just play this room as intended, we have to grab onto 3 of these thick walls. While this room is not as open as the original, Dust Bunnies, they're coming for ya. We can at least do a wave dash at the start of this room. That allows us to skip the first wall, which saves a grab. And that's actually all I was able to figure out. I didn't know of any way to skip 2, let alone 3 of these walls. Madeline simply doesn't have enough dashes for that. I decided to let it rest for a bit, play some other things, and then one day I stumbled upon this room again. Surely there's a way of saving at least 1 grab, right? So I got to work, and after using my brain for a bit...
Well,
that's rare!
I discovered that you can wave dash under the first wall, then do a wall bounce here to get past the second wall. That still doesn't solve the room completely though, because we have no dashes left for the third wall. At least that saves a grab. I also theorized that you can maybe jump off this high bit of wall to get some extra distance, but I didn't think it'd be useful in any way. Turns out I was dead wrong. As I'd later find out by searching the internet, you can use the height from this wall to fall through the first set of dust bunnies. After that, the strategy is very similar to what I had. Jump under the second wall and do a wall bounce to get past the third wall. And with that, we've somehow managed to survive Dust Bunnies 2: Return of the Thick Walls.
Damn, we nearly screwed over Mad Lad twice.
It's honestly a coincidence that there were exactly 3 walls here. Any less and it would have already beaten this room grabless, and any more, it would have been impossible. A couple of simple rooms later and we're at the Oshiro part. And what do you know, we're greeted with yet another series of thick walls. Why is this level so obsessed with these? Well, actually, these ones don't pose much of a threat, because we have the thick boy himself to help us. This means the rest of this chapter is smooth sailing. Before we move on to the next chapter, I'd just like to point out this chapter was one of my favorites so far. It's just the right level of difficulty to keep me engaged, but not be frustrating. And I'm not just saying that because I know what comes next, but I mean it. If for whatever reason you're low on time and you can only do one chapter of this challenge, choose this one. But alas, we can't delay the inevitable. Golden Ridge is a force to be reckoned with. Well, that was the case last time at least. This time around, the stage actually seems much tamer. That doesn't mean there aren't any tricky rooms though. Take the third screen for example. We're expected to break this wall to progress, but we've already used up our dash at this point. The only way to get it back is by entering this bubble and then backtracking to the wall and breaking it. It seems simple enough, but there's no way to get from this wall to here. That doesn't mean this room is impossible though. The point where we have to use our dash is to get from here to here. Now, we can't skip this dash, but we can use it to its fullest potential. By doing a diagonal demo dash, we can squeeze under this wall and then wall jump off it. In fact, we get so much distance from this that we can even skip the first Wonder Wall. Don't sue me, Oasis, I didn't say Wonder Wall, I said Wonder Wall. Now, rooms like that one aren't the reason why Ridge is infamous. We have yet to encounter the two mechanics that make Ridge so grueling. Well, speak of the devil, because here's the first one. Scroller blocks with spikes on the top. The game wants you to grab onto the side of this block and maneuver through this tight passageway, but instead, let's just make use of this empty space down here to do an extended hyper. If you're fast enough, you should have more than enough time to catch up to the block and neutral off the right side to make it to the end of the room. It's been a while since I've mentioned the standard grabless route. This room is another example of a grabless platform activation. And hey, here's our second troublesome mechanic, wind. Excellent timing. Well, in this checkpoint, the wind doesn't actually hinder us all that much. You see, if there are walls in combination with wind and the game is expecting us to climb them, neutraling off them becomes impossible. We just don't get enough height from it. The A side of this chapter had a ton of these problematic walls, but the B side seems to be nicer to us somehow. Oh, there's also this one room that doesn't have wind, but instead has a scroller block with spikes on it. For now, put a mental pin on this room, we'll come back to it later. With that, we're on to the third checkpoint of this chapter. The first room does have a strong gust of wind, but it actually helps us by giving us enough momentum to neutral over these walls. Without wind, this room might have been impossible. The next two rooms are simple platforming challenges that don't involve wind, and then we get to this room. The basic idea of this room is simple. Guide a scroller block vertically through a winding course. And the guiding part is done by grabbing onto the sides of the block and holding the direction you want to go. By now, you should have learned that's not a great idea. Indeed, some of you may have already asked yourself, do we actually need to steer the scroller block? Can't we just let it rise on its own? Good question, but unfortunately the answer to that is a resounding no. Unless you can find a way to make a scroller block clip through literal walls, it ain't happening. No worries though, because there's another question we can ask here. Can't we just skip using the scroller block entirely? After all, we managed to almost completely bypass it in a previous room. Sadly, there are two spots we can't get past. The first is this long line of spikes, and the second is the ending of the room. And unless you can find a way to clip through literal spikes, it ain't... What? This is it, people. Peak Celeste. Madeline can now clip through spikes. Man, I can't take this anymore.
2 days later.
Okay, I think I've mentally recovered from what just happened, but one question still eludes me. How is any of this even possible? Like, did the developers forget to put in a spike hitbox here? Or did I manage to bend the fabric of space and time to my will? Or maybe I cheated by using invincibility mode? The answer to all three of those questions is no. The real reason as to why this glitch occurs is so complicated, it puts even demo dashing to shame. That's right, people. Go grab your popcorn, because I am going to explain what is quite possibly the most complicated trick I have seen in any game, period. Disclaimer. This will be a very technical explanation. We're really getting into the realm of game programming here. So don't worry if you don't understand it at first, I didn't either. So I present you with a choice. If you want to skip this explanation entirely, you can take the blue pill and go to this timestamp, where I summarize everything that we'll need to remember going forward. Or, if you want to understand the nitty-gritty of this trick and why it's so insane that this is even possible, take the red pill. Continue watching and follow me on my journey to insanity. Have you made your choice? Okay, let's do this. Alright, don't mind the scribblings that are already here. I had to do like a ton of takes of this, and I don't have like detergent to wipe off all the excess residue, so I just have to wipe it off with this. So that's why. Okay, so first of all, the reason why any of this happens is because Celeste has way too many spinners. Spinners are these circular spikes that are often found in stages like Golden Ridge and the Summit. But if you were to check every one of these spinners collision, every frame, it will be way too memory intensive. And besides, Madeline is not going to go through every spinner on every frame, so you can make a bit of a compromise. And the developers decided that using a sort of clock system would be best. So the spinners are kind of arbitrarily put into 3 groups, and every frame, the game has this counter which goes up and it checks each one of these groups. So on the first frame of the game, the counter is here and it checks the first group of spinners. Then here, and then it goes back to the start. So every 3 frames, all of the spinners are checked, which means like, I mean, it's 3 frames is like a 20th of a second, so it doesn't really matter all that much. But there's a problem with this counter. It breaks at some point. You can imagine this counter going up 1, 2, 3, 4, on and on and on. But there's a limit. And it has to do with rounding, or more specifically floating point precision, but I'll try to explain it in layman's terms. When you have a video, and it has a view count of like 3,000,1,053. Most people are just inclined to say, well, that's about 3 million, or in scientific notation, that's 3 times 10 to the 6, which is, 10 to the 6 is a million, so nothing special there. But we're inclined to round to the nearest power of 10, while computers do something similar, but they round to the nearest power of 2. Of course, computers are much more precise than us, and they will actually be able to store this entire number. But not forever. At a certain point, namely 524,288, the computer kind of breaks. This number is equal to 1 times 2 to the 19. The 1 is here for a reason. You'll see why in a sec. But when we increment this number, this 1, it's going to be like 1.0000001 times 2 to the 19. Which is basically just 1. So this is about equal to 1 times 2 to the 19. But that's just this again. So the counter actually stops at this point because it doesn't have any precision to keep going. Which means the spinner counter, this thing, the clock, will just stop at some point. Maybe at 3, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. What does matter is that these 2 groups, these other 2, they never get loaded again. They never get checked ever again because every frame it's checking this one group. Which means you can go through 2/3 of the spinners in the game. Now, one final question. What is this number? I mean, it's just a random number, right? Well, this is a number of frames because this counter goes up every frame of gameplay. And Celeste runs at 60 frames a second, so we can divide this number by 60. There are 60 seconds in a minute, you probably know that, so divide by 60 again, and once more because there are 60 minutes in an hour. And that gives us 118 hours. Yep, that's a while. in summary, if we wait for 118 hours in-game without pausing, 2/3 of the spinners bug out and are never loaded ever again, which means we can go through them. The other 1/3 of spinners are still loaded every frame and are something to worry about. 118 hours is a long time, nearly a week, but it's still better than the wait times for German public transport. As a bonus, particle effects like wind also break, which is hilarious to see. Now, I know I've bent the rules already by allowing grab jumps, but literal invincibility? Isn't that going to trivialize the rest of the game? Well, no actually, for 2 reasons. 1, this only works on spinners, not the normal pointy spikes. And 2, because we have to wait for 118 hours each time we want to activate this trick, we are not just going to do this on a whim. This trick truly is a last resort in case nothing else works. And believe it or not, but that was the last new trick in this video. That doesn't mean the rest of the B-sides will be straightforward though, because everything after this point will make heavy use of what we already know. Man, that took a while. I think I need some rest. Oh crap, we still have to do one more checkpoint, don't we? And that one room we skipped. Oh my days. Thankfully, in comparison, these last few rooms are a breeze. Literally, because we have more wind. Woo! Okay, seriously though, the wind here is pretty awesome. With it, we can jump from this bubble to the platform, and because Spinner Stun is still active, we can go through the spike and just jump to the end apparently. No key tokens required. That's about it for checkpoint 4, so let's go back to the one room we skipped previously. Without Spinner Stun, this would have been an absolute pain to do. While it is technically possible, it requires a ton of precise inputs that even I don't understand fully. With Spinner Stun though, we can easily cheese this entire room and make our way to the top. Okay, now we're done. You might have noticed throughout this series that the difficulty of these chapters varies wildly. Same holds true for this chapter because it's trivial compared to what we just went through. Everything before the giant mirror is centered around red bubbles and dash blocks, which are mechanics that don't usually hinder us all too much. Quite the opposite in fact. Dash blocks can often give us extra momentum, which we might need to skip a troublesome section. One thing that will also help us is the layout of the central chamber checkpoint. You see, normally you're required to get 2 keys and put them in these 2 locked gates, but if we want to get this key, we'll have to find a way to beat this room. This might not look that hard, after all, you have plenty of dash blocks to give you momentum, but I still struggled with it anyways. I'm not saying by any means that this room is impossible, but it's just a bit too tough for my tastes. So why don't we just skip it altogether? If we get the first key and then open this lock, we can do the room as intended and take the red bubble right, but then instead of continuing here, let's do a wall bounce off this wall to get up here. Now we can get the key as intended. We can do the rest of the central chamber without too much hassle, but the room leading up to the giant mirror features a sizable problem. And no, it's not the mirror, although it's also massive. Instead, it's this humongous dash block right here. Big John over here is blocking practically the entirety of this corridor. Like, come on, have some courtesy, let a small Madeline through. And don't be so prickly. Actually, speaking of being small, that's exactly how I want to do this room. We're going to need to do a demo dash above John to get to his right side, and then we can neutral off him as we please. You deserve this, John. One problem though, how are we going to make sure he's on the left side? After all, if we don't dash, he'll be all the way over there, which is too far to do a demo dash from. This might seem similar to the time we had to do a demo dash above a dash block in the summit, but that time it was a cute little abomination from the depths of hell. I mean, it was different. Here, we can actually use a setup to make the dash block stay on the left side. I'll let Fel the Curl explain this one because I got it from him.
In Gravel speedruns of Celeste, players somehow have to make it through this section without clinging onto the walls and move to the right like you normally would. So as usual with Gravel's runs, we are going to completely cheat the game. A well-timed down left into the bubble sets up the block in the next section, allowing us to cut off Madeline's legs in order to make it to the other side, where a few precise neutral jumps bring us to victory. It's just that simple.
Whoa, that was a little fast there, bud. You can tell he's a speedrunner. All joking aside, huge thanks to Fel for explaining this strat, because I never would have come up with it myself. We've now reached the giant mirror, who told me her name was Jane. Apparently she had a relationship with John for about 10 years, but then they got a divorce.
John, I want a divorce.
And let me tell you, Jane is much friendlier than John. Look, just because you're enormous doesn't mean you need to be a jerk. In fact, the entire second half of this chapter is a piece of cake. All thanks to Jane, of course. Let's get the crystal heart and... Wait, what was I even saying just now? Giving inanimate objects names? Am I going mad? I don't know, man, but let's just move on to the next chapter before I completely lose it. I can keep this one brief, because just like last time,
There is nothing worse than a Kevin.
and this stage features a lot of them. Besides one other room with Badalin, the Kevins are really the only challenging factor here. In fact, you don't even need any special tricks to beat this stage. Yeah, no dash trio, no wall bounces, no demo dashes, nothing but pure skill. So you know what that means? It's time for a montage! We've now gotten to the final two chapters of this video, Summit and Core, and I can tell you these are not pushovers. To beat these, we will need every trick I've taught you so far, so let's get started. 0 meters starts off with some simple and fun platforming, but just before we're allowed to leave, we're greeted to this obstacle. I tried a lot of things here. Demo dashing through this gap didn't work, falling through this gap instead of dashing was also impossible. Turns out, this corridor is just barely too tall to make it through. Well, that's a shame. Guess it's time to wait 118 hours again. Okay, well at least that worked. Now we're on to everyone's favorite part of Summit, escape from the city. Man, I already have an aversion to this first room just from looking at it. We're definitely not going to be able to take the intended route on the left, but maybe this wall will help us up? Okay, there's some spikes here, but we can just do one of those janky double wall jumps we did in chapter 2 to get past that. Then we dash up to this wall, grab the block, and... oh. Different plan. Let's instead wall bounce off this wall, go left, do a corner boost, because that also still exists, get this dash crystal, activate the block, go back, and then use the extra dash to do some funny variant shenanigans here. Simple, right? Well, it's been a little while, but I'll have to get off the list again. Also, if you want to do this one with standard grab list, it's one grab, so there you go. The second room is also full of trash, but at least it's not ending up on the list. Instead of grabbing onto this trash block, you can barely maneuver a wall bounce onto this wall. The next room is an actual joke for this point in the game, and then we reach the orb room. God, the orb room. This room is by definition impossible in standard grab list because of this garbage here, but that's not the real problem here. No, the real issue is right at the end, here, where we have to get from this wall to this wall with literally no other walls nearby. I found out that with the absolute utmost precision, you can neutral from one platform to the other, but you'd have to do that twice. Twice! Of course! Here's my best attempt at the strategy. Luckily, that's not the only way to tackle this room. Universe Cat, the Celeste Grabless goddess, figured out a different strategy that's much more consistent. The walls on the right might seem lethal, but as I've told you many times now, spikes are merely an illusion, so a well-timed wall jump off this corner lines you up perfectly to reach the next part. And I actually managed to do it twice this time! With that, I am proud to announce we can finally put the trash in the trash, once and for all. Well, at least for now. And it finally seems like the game is showing remorse for its actions, because 1000 meters, 1500 meters, and even 2000 meters are probably the easiest checkpoints in this entire video. Seriously, I beat these in 7 minutes. This challenge is so random sometimes. Even 2500 meters is doable, apart from this room. Fortunately, this game is still incredibly broken, so we can just dash under this dash block without having it kill us, and make use of this dash block's upward momentum to make it over. Thanks, dash block, you're not a trash block.
B tier.
Okay, now don't blink. 20, 19, 18, 17, 16. Oh, wait, this part isn't possible. Nothing a little spinner stun can't solve though. 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. You can neutral over these walls because of the updraft. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Cassette. ML, you idiot. That didn't happen. You forgot this chapter existed, didn't you? Well, I sure did. Everything we saw about the course A side at the start of the video still holds true. Touching the ground doesn't refill your dashes, there are launching blocks, conveyor walls, there's a fire and ice theme, you know the drill. So I hope you're still looking forward to this, but don't worry, we got this. And after this we can all go on a long, extended holiday. Let's not get ahead of ourselves though, this chapter isn't going to beat itself. Here we go! Oh. What a warm welcome, huh? Well, I've gotten tired of explaining what doesn't work, so instead I'll show you the only right way to conquer this room. Leave. No, seriously, leave the room, because then you can do a hyper dash through the screen transition to make it to the first wall, where you do one of two things. Either you demo dash under the wall and wall jump like this, or you do the swag strat, literally wall jump off lava. Isn't that cool? Anyway, once we get to this wall, you're forced to do a janky double wall jump, followed by a frame perfect wall jump off this corner, followed by another precise wall jump off the lava, followed by yet another frame perfect wall jump off this corner. That's a nested sentence if I've ever seen one. Also, this room is going on the list. Next. Oh great, an easy block room. Well, I say easy, but the jump off this launching block is still quite a chore if you don't know what you're doing. Ooh, another basic room. Great. For this next room, I'll just tell you that spinner stun is the way to go. You could do this room without it if you do an insane pause buffering strat, but it's all pointless anyway because of this wall in the next room. So might as well do the spinner stun now so we don't have to do it later. Even then, this room is not trivial. We'll first have to do a hyperdash through the screen transition, and then make it through some spinners, then dash through the only spinner that isn't loaded. Now after that, most of the spinners aren't loaded, so just be careful not to hit those, and you should be good. So despite this room's high difficulty, Spinner Stun at least made it bearable, so shoutouts to Spinner Stun, I guess. Speaking of Spinner Stun, the first room of the second subchapter could also benefit from it. Again, there is a way to do this room without it, but it's all just for bragging rights anyway, and I'm not really in the mood for them. Besides, even with Spinner Stun, this room is fairly difficult, because
a lot of the spinners that are loaded are in really annoying spots.
As it turns out, fairly difficult was an understatement here. It took me nearly an hour to do this one 10-second long room. Okay, this next room doesn't involve Spinner Stun though. You would normally dash through these two gaps and grab onto the launching block, but we can actually skip going through the first gap, which gives us a spare dash. With that dash, we can completely ignore the block instead. One simple ice room later, and we're onto this mess. I'm just going to come right out and tell you, this one's impossible. This room contains the literal worst possible combination of game elements for grabless. Grab evators, too thick walls, dash crystals that are hard to reach, and most importantly, spinners. I know what you're thinking. Can't you just collect a dash crystal, wait a bit, position yourself on the dash crystal when it respawns to effectively gain an extra dash through these spinners to get this next dash crystal, do the same thing again but with a different setup twice, and then get to the end? Well, you're close, but no cigar. Because after all of that, you'll find yourself barely unable to reach the final wall. No worries though. Another precise setup will allow you to jump into this corner. At this point, the game will simply put you out of your misery and correct your position so you can get up. At least it doesn't get any worse than that. It gets worse than that. Okay, before I continue, I need to confess to something. I ran out of interesting ways to tell you that a room is challenging. Hard, tough, difficult, tricky. All of these words have appeared numerous times throughout this script, so let's try to find some synonyms online to vary things up. Oh, here, I found one that really fits the room we're in. Wondrous. Feel free to click off the video now, by the way. All joking aside, this room consists of 4 wonders, but as you can probably tell, I am a bit tired of doing them. By some miracle though, we can skip 3 of the 4 wonders with some alternative routing. Only this final wonder is onerous. Oh, and make sure to jump off the tippity top of this right wall, because if you don't, you won't easily be able to reach the end. If you fall, it's still possible, but you might as well just give up and try again, because it is ludicrously precise. We've now reached the final 10 rooms of this video, but you know what they say, the last mile is the longest. In this first room, it's important that no matter what you do not touch this switch right here. If you do, you'll have to redo the entirety of the second checkpoint again. Why shouldn't you touch it? Well, just look at it. We can skip this entire room when it's in ice mode. Celeste is starting to look more like an open world game than a linear platformer at this point. At the end of the second room, we'll again skip past the switch to completely trivialize the third room. If you accidentally get it though, don't worry, because you can just intentionally kill Madeline to save yourself. One slight problem now, the transition from the third to the fourth room contains no switches, which means we'll have to beat this room in ice mode now. But because we're in ice mode, this launching block decided to take a day off. So instead, you'll have to be a speedrunner and rush up the side of this wall before the ice gets you. Really exhilarating, and as I learned afterwards, totally unnecessary. At least I had fun doing it. We're on to the final 5. This first room is not that burdensome, except this block at the start that is positioned in an inconvenient way. You can either collect a dash crystal and super dash it, or do a wall bounce into the dash crystal to get to this corner here. Both of these strategies are a bit unwieldy, but they get the job done. The next room just asks that you fling yourself. There are numerous ways to do the room after that, but as long as you mind the sandwich walls and don't hit the switch here, you should be golden. As you will have guessed already, we need to do that because the fourth room would otherwise be impossible. From there, you're free to bend the fabric of space-time to your will.
From there, you're free to bend the fabric of space-time to your will. From there, you're free to bend the fabric of space-time to your will.
And we've reached the core! We actually did it! We managed to climb this mountain, again, while only having to grab once. I am quite proud of that, to be honest. I know I'm repeating myself here, but this is insane. Alas, it's time to say goodbye to this challenge for a little while. Wait a second. Say goodbye? I could do something with that.
We all know what Celeste is. You know that game where you can climb, but I'm not convinced that's the way to play. You'll only get this far, not to fight by. I just wanna debunk this fake news. Gotta make you understand. Never gonna grab that wall. I'd rather just not play at all. Make these spinners done so they can't hurt you. And I'm really like this guy. Can't wait to say goodbye. And I'm not gonna lie, I hate you. You've all been waiting for so long. Yeah, it's been a pain, but it's fine, I made it. Inside my brain there's not much going on, except the fact that I'm 2 months late. And if you ask me to stop singing, then I will.
So I was normally going to put my list over there so you can see it, but it didn't really work out, so I've just put it here instead. So this is the full list, except for one thing that I forgot to write down. Can I write and hold the camera at the same time? So it's the one impossible room in 1B, because you need 2 grabs to do that for standard grabless, but for variant grabless you can do that with 1 grab. And the strat to actually save a grab there is TAS only, so I mean, yeah, I guess it's going on the list. So this is the complete final list, and maybe some things will be added to this in part 3, but I hope nothing gets added, because this is already long enough. Speaking of part 3, if you're watching this video as it premieres, I am live on Twitch right now to play the Seasides and Farewell for the next episode. And I am totally not being forced to do this by some shadowy entity. I am definitely doing this out of my own volition. Wait, am I not allowed to say that? Oh well. I know this was a really long video. I also didn't expect it to be over an hour, but I still hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. Part 3 should be much shorter and simpler, so if you couldn't follow along, don't worry. I will try to reel you back in for part 3. But if you're still watching, you're the real MVPs, because you don't just watch this kind of video by accident. And finally, a shout out to everyone who I mentioned in the credits, especially Uni, because she is like the Celeste Grabless goddess. I keep saying that, but it's true. She actually did all of the rooms I put on the list, and fast. She actually speedran this thing, which, I mean, it's a 476-hour run, but technically is it speedrun? I mean, it involves 472 hours of waiting, but technically it's fast. You know what I've just realized? I never actually watched the trailer for this game. Let's do that.